I was sitting by the fireplace, just like any other Sunday evening, when my son raised a glass and said, "Here's to giving the old man a real home, for once." Laughter followed. His wife giggled, adding, "Now he won't have to sleep in that shack anymore." I smiled. They didn't know I built that lake house 30 years ago and bought 9 more just like it, all in secret, under different names. That night, I didn't argue, I let them toast. But the next morning, they found out whose name was really on the deed, and a few others too. They thought they were mocking an old man. Turns out, I was just watching them bury themselves. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far the truth travels. The morning sun broke gently through the blinds, casting long, warm stripes across the wooden floor of my little Asheville home. I was sipping black coffee from my chipped #1 grandpa mug when the email came through. The sender was my son. Subject line, "A special weekend invitation." I paused. Jason didn't email often. His texts were usually short, efficient, bank statements, appointment reminders, logistics. But this one had a tone, polished, formal. "Dear Dad," it began, "we'd be honored if you could join us at the lake house this weekend. We're celebrating a new chapter, and your presence would mean a lot." My gut tensed. Honored? Presence? That wasn't how we spoke, not even when things were good between us, and they hadn't been good in years. Still, I replied with a simple, "Looking forward to it." Maybe I shouldn't have. Saturday came wrapped in early spring mist. Asheville was just beginning to thaw from winter, the dogwoods along the Blue Ridge showing timid buds. The drive to the lake house took about an hour. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I caught sight of the grand entrance, wide archways, slate roof, the kind of place that gets featured in lifestyle magazines. A valet, I kid you not, opened my door with a crisp nod. I adjusted my jacket and stepped out. Inside, champagne flowed like water. Trays of hors d'oeuvres made the rounds, balanced effortlessly by young staff dressed in black. I spotted Jason by the fireplace, laughing with a group of well-dressed men. When our eyes met, he offered a wave and a nod, then went back to his conversation. No hug, no, "Glad you came, Dad," just a nod. His wife, Clara, approached with a stiff smile. "You found the place all right?" she asked, as if I hadn't once helped them move into their first apartment just a mile from here. I nodded. "Looks like you two have done well." "Oh, Jason's business really took off," she replied, already glancing over my shoulder. The guests were mostly strangers, business partners, investors, tech guys and loafers without socks. Not a cousin, not a neighbor, not even Jason's sister, Lily. I stood by the wall, sipping sparkling water, a fixture more than a guest. Then I noticed the welcome banner draped over the mantel. "Thank you to everyone who believed in the dream." Everyone, except apparently the man who co-signed Jason's first business loan. Dinner was served under dim chandeliers, long tables set with name cards. I found mine at the end. Jason stood, glass in hand. "I want to say something before dessert," he began, flashing that charismatic smile that always won investors. "This house isn't just a milestone. It's proof that with grit, vision, and the right people, anything is possible." He raised his glass. "To my mentors, my brilliant partners, even my high school economics teacher, thank you. You taught me to think big." I waited. A nod, a mention, a glance my way. Nothing. Cheers erupted. Glasses clinked. I smiled, polite as always. Then a young man leaned in, whispering behind his wine glass. "I heard he just showed up for the drinks." I chuckled lightly, swallowing the bitterness. Later, Jason called for attention again. "We have one last surprise," he said, grinning like a showman. "A gesture of gratitude for someone special in my life. My old man." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Dad," he continued, "you've always, done your best. So, I'm giving you this house. That's right. It's yours now. No rent, no mortgage. A proper roof for your golden years." More laughter. I nodded, eyes scanning the room. Some smiled kindly. Others snickered. A few looked at me like I should bow. I didn't. Just kept my smile. They didn't know about the 10 deeds in the drawer at home. 10 homes bought quietly over the years. Investments, savings, a life lived humbly. Jason never asked. Later that night, I slipped outside, following the garden path down to the lake. The air was crisp, the moon's reflection trembling on the water. I let the silence fill the space where anger wanted to settle. Sacrifices don't always get thanked. That's not why we make them. But I remembered Jason's first car, the broken furnace I fixed in their first house, the tuition checks I mailed when he forgot to apply for aid. I remembered his mother, God rest her, whispering to me, "He'll understand one day." Maybe, maybe not. A text buzzed in my coat pocket. Unknown number. I tapped it open. "You don't deserve this," I stared. The name beneath it made me freeze. Lily. The morning sunlight spilled across the lake like a quiet apology. I walked the grounds alone, my hands tucked into the pockets of my worn cardigan. The laughter and clinking glasses of last night were gone now, replaced by birdsong and the low hum of wind moving through the trees. My shoes crunched against the flagstone path, a path I remembered selecting with care decades ago. Each stone had been laid by a man who believed in family. I had even planted that dogwood tree over by the gazebo in memory of my wife. I hadn't seen it bloom in years, and then it hit me. This was my property, or rather, it had been. Lakeview Estate, purchased back in '93, meant to be a quiet retreat for our family, a place where my son might one day teach his own children to fish, just like I had taught him. But there was no acknowledgement of that now. Not in Sterling's speech, not in the invitation, not in the crowd of strangers who filled the rooms like termites. Just a gift, he called it. A mockery wrapped in ribbon. I stepped into the house, expecting the scent of pine polish and thyme. Instead, it smelled like new paint and sterile fabric. The leather chair, the one that had molded to the shape of my body after years of evening reads and long naps, was gone. In its place stood a sleek, angular chair, all sharp edges and no soul. I moved instinctively to the hall closet, opened it. Empty. No coat, no old fishing hat, not even the slippers I used to leave by the door. Every trace of me had been scrubbed from this place like chalk from a blackboard. The quiet hit harder than any insult. Back home, I walked straight to my study. The room still smelled like cedar and old paper. I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out a worn red folder labeled Lakeview Purchase, 1993. Inside were copies of the original deed, notarized checks, and yellowing letters from the sellers. My handwriting scrawled across the margins, notes, dreams, reminders. I had bought that house fair and square, but something gnawed at me. I flipped through another folder marked Insurance Docs. That's when I saw it. A document with my signature, dated 10 years ago. Sterling had asked me to sign it during a rushed breakfast. "Just insurance stuff, Dad," he'd said. "Needs your name to keep the policy active." It wasn't insurance. It was a deed transfer. Buried in legal jargon, the house had been moved quietly into one of his LLCs. I had handed over the legacy I built with my own hands, thinking I was signing off on storm coverage. My stomach tightened. I picked up the phone and called Bryce, an old friend who still worked at the bank downtown. "Bryce, you busy?" There was a pause. "Not for you. What's going on?" "I need a discreet favor. Ownership records for a property, Lakeview Estate." He was quiet for a moment longer than he should have been. "You might not like what you find." "I already don't." 30 minutes later, he called me back. The house was indeed under a shell company, one linked to Sterling's development firm. My name hadn't been on anything in years. Heartbreak didn't come as a crash. It came as a slow, suffocating realization. "I can help," Bryce said. "We'll get the full paper trail." Quietly. "Thanks," I whispered. That night, I sat at the dock, the wood still creaking like it used to under my weight. The lake was still. Not peaceful, just still, like it was waiting. "You can't steal what was never truly yours," I muttered to the water, unsure if I was talking about the house, or Sterling, or something deeper. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from that same unknown number. He lied to more than just you. The footage arrived late in the afternoon, buried beneath a short message from my cousin Eloise. Thought you might want a copy. Bit different from what they posted online. I clicked it open, expecting little. The lake house event had already faded to a bitter aftertaste. But as the video played, something strange pulled at me. Scene after scene of smiling faces, champagne flutes raised, group photos near the water, all carefully curated. But I was missing. Not missing in the way that's subtle or forgettable. I was cut, cropped, removed like an afterthought. In one group shot near the fireplace, I remembered clearly standing to Sterling's left, hand resting on the shoulder of my grandson, Milo. But the final cut showed only Sterling, Milo, and Clarice, as if I had never stood there. The final straw came during the so-called legacy montage. A highlight reel, stitched with sepia tones and piano music, featuring moments from Sterling's childhood to his business empire's rise. There were baby photos, graduation shots, even his first car. But not once did my face appear. I closed the laptop. A tight silence filled the room, the kind that grips the throat before tears arrive. I didn't cry. I reached for something solid instead, my old photo album, dusty and fraying at the corners. Flipping through it was like opening a box of proof. Here I was, carrying Sterling on my back at Yosemite. There, helping him build his first treehouse. And the one photo that always hung in our hallway, Christmas 1989, all three of us in matching sweaters, my arm wrapped gently around Clarice's shoulder. I picked that one out and stared. Then, just to check, I reopened the montage. And the same photo flashed on screen, but with my face blurred. Underneath, a caption read, "Unknown Man, 1989. I sat back in my chair, the weight of what I was seeing pulling the room into a slow spin. This wasn't negligence, it was deliberate, sanitized. As if erasing me rewrote their success story cleaner, shinier. I dialed Clarice. "Dad," she answered too sweetly. "Wasn't that event something?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Beautiful production. I was especially struck by the photo work. Really professional." She chuckled, that brittle kind of laugh. "Oh, Sterling's team did all that. You know how meticulous they are? Probably just streamlined a few shots to make everything consistent." "Of course," I said. "Consistency matters." We chatted a minute more. I pretended warmth. She pretended interest. When I hung up, I sat in the silence again, this time with a different fire brewing. I packed a small box of my own, that Christmas photo, letters from my late wife, and an old camcorder, drove into town, straight to the local historical society. Inside, the archivist recognized my name and brightened. "Oh, funny timing. We just received a Hannigan donation last week." He led me to a back room and pulled out a leather-bound album labeled Sterling Hannigan, Family Legacy. Inside were photos I recognized, but not the versions I remembered. My name was absent. My face, when it appeared, was labeled Former Caretaker, or left blank altogether. My hand curled into a fist without closing. "Did Sterling donate this?" I asked. The archivist nodded, signed the release himself. "Would you like a copy?" "No," I said, then paused. "Yes, for my records." Back home, I laid the album beside my own. Page for page, side by side. The erasure versus the truth. I pulled out the original Christmas photo again. In my wife's handwriting on the back, Ephra and Sterling, Christmas '89, proof in ink and memory. I set it on my desk, leaning it against the lamp. It stayed there, upright and unwavering, as if daring the lies to knock it over. That night, as rain began to tap against the window pane, my phone buzzed. A new message from the same unknown number. You weren't the only one erased. Attached was a photo, another family moment, my blurred face again, and a note. She knows everything. The office still smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, though I hadn't spent much time in there since the kids moved out. The shelves bowed under the weight of forgotten binders and dust-coated memorabilia. I moved slowly, the weight of the past heavy in my knees and in my chest. Tonight wasn't about nostalgia. It was about finding what was left, what hadn't been taken or rewritten. I crouched, struggling to pull out a stack of boxes that had settled deep into the corner of the lowest shelf. My fingers brushed against something unexpected, a soft give under the floor, one of the planks. I tapped it, hollow. Curiosity nudged me. I wedged a screwdriver beneath the edge and pried it up. Dust and time spilled out, and nestled in the gap was a curled slip of paper, yellowed and sealed with my wife's handwriting. To our son, only if he ever forgets. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I sat down on the old armchair, one of the few pieces left untouched, and stared at her handwriting. So familiar, it felt like she'd just written it yesterday. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Her words cut deeper than any betrayal I'd suffered so far. She had written this on the eve of her final surgery, knowing there was a chance she wouldn't make it back. She spoke of values, kindness, honesty, earning what you receive. She wrote about me, how I'd worked in silence for decades, how I'd sacrificed so Sterling could dream freely. And then the line that cleaved something in me. If you ever take what's not yours, know that your father sees everything, even in silence. I pressed the letter against my chest. I didn't cry, but something inside me shifted, realigned. She'd known, and either he never saw this letter, or worse, he had and chose to forget. A sudden compulsion took over. I headed down to the basement. The old safe stood behind the false wall, the same one we used to stash away birth certificates and holiday cash. I hadn't touched it in years. My hands hesitated at the dial, but my muscle memory did not fail me. It clicked open on the first try. Inside, our original will, a dusty cassette tape labeled Thanksgiving '03, and an envelope in bold red ink, "Do not trust Clarice." I didn't know what I expected to find, but not this. Not a time capsule that suddenly made the last few months make far too much sense. I packed everything and drove straight to the lake house. I needed privacy to think, to hear. The guest room still held the faint trace of lavender air freshener. I popped the cassette into an old portable player I found in the closet. The hiss of tape gave way to a heated argument, crackly but unmistakable. My wife's voice, firm, tired, but unshaken. "I said no, Sterling. If you want part of the estate, you'll earn it like your father did." His voice was younger then, but the entitlement was already polished. "You're just hoarding it. What's the point of legacy if you don't share it with the living?" She didn't flinch. "What you're asking for isn't sharing, it's taking." I stopped the tape. I couldn't listen to more, not yet. The envelope labeled Clarice lay heavy in my hand. Inside was a notarized document, power of attorney forms, ones I had apparently signed during my own hospitalization. Clarice had used them, transferred 3 properties during that time, all without my knowledge. I sat down, the guest room spinning around me. It wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. I picked up a pen and scribbled a note to Jackson, my old law school buddy turned estate attorney. If anyone could trace the transactions and identify a way forward, it would be him. But just as I folded the documents to prepare mailing them, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. Don't trust Jackson either. He knew. I froze. My breath caught. The letter slipped from my fingers. Staring at the glowing screen, I felt the walls close in again. Every corner of this story was rotting from the inside. The auditorium buzzed with synthetic energy, the kind piped in through overhead lights and choreographed applause. The 25th anniversary gala of Hannigan Corporation was in full swing, awash in velvet drapes, champagne towers, and crystal chandeliers. I arrived 10 minutes early, more out of habit than anticipation. The usher, young and visibly unfamiliar with who I was, glanced at my invitation and directed me to table 23, near the exit signs, far from the stage. I sat, back straight, nodding at strangers who barely returned the gesture. A waitress passed by with a tray of flutes. I took one, more for something to do with my hands than the taste. The founder's table, decked in white roses and gold-edged menus, was front and center. Sterling was already there, grinning wide for photographers, Clarice glowing beside him in an emerald gown. My name was not on any of the placards. Then the lights dimmed. Sterling walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, microphone in hand, posture theatrical. 25 years ago, I had a dream and a basement, he began. Laughter followed, the kind that comes too easily. From nothing to this, towers in 3 cities, a workforce of 4,000, and a legacy of innovation. Legacy. A giant screen lit up behind him, displaying a montage. Sterling at construction sites, Sterling signing contracts, Sterling cutting ribbons. In early clips, I spotted myself, silent, in the background, shaking hands, lifting boxes. But as the years passed in seconds, my presence thinned, until it vanished altogether. By the time the video ended, I was no longer part of the story. Applause erupted again. I clapped, slowly. Clarice caught my eye from the front row. She smirked, just slightly. Afterward, I made my way to the refreshments table, pretending to look for coffee, needing a moment alone. That's when I overheard 2 interns whispering behind me. "Who's that guy in the back?" one asked. "No idea," the other replied. "Didn't know the old guy was still alive." I turned, said nothing, just smiled. They looked away, embarrassed, as if they'd seen a ghost. Later, I found the PR coordinator backstage. "Excuse me," I said gently, "who edited the tribute video?" "We work with an external agency now," she replied. "We have strict visual guidelines for brand cohesion." Brand cohesion. I tried the VP of Communications next. "Busy," his assistant barked. "He's in post-event debrief." I nodded, stepped aside, walked the hallway alone. On my way out, I paused at the wall-mounted company plaque, the one I remembered helping install 2 decades ago. The brass had been updated. My name was gone. Gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I drove to the local newspaper archive, a quiet building with humming fluorescents and yellowing files. The clerk, Bryce's cousin, let me in without question. I pulled articles from the early 90s, groundbreakings, community fundraisers, local business awards. There I was, in each one. Ephra Hannigan, co-founder of Hannigan Corporation, the face they were trying to erase. I scanned them all. At home, I emailed Bryce. "Secure these. I need legal documentation on file." Then, walking through downtown the next afternoon, I spotted workers installing a billboard above Main and 5th. Sterling's face loomed larger than life. The caption, "Built from the ground up. Alone." I pulled my coat tighter, the chill biting sharper than usual. As I turned to walk away, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. "You saw the plaque? That wasn't the only name removed." The morning air in Asheville carried a deceptive calm, crisp and gentle, like the surface of a pond before a stone is cast. I parked outside Jackson's law office just after sunrise. The building hadn't changed in years. Same brass placard, same creaky wooden door that groaned a greeting as I stepped inside. He was already seated behind his desk, fingers loosely clasped, but his eyes refused to meet mine. For a man who'd once helped draft my first will, who'd toasted at my 50th wedding anniversary, his silence hit harder than any words might have. Without a greeting, I placed the cassette, the letter from Ephra, and the power of attorney document on the desk between us. The weight of those items was not lost on either of us. "You want to tell me what this all means, Jackson?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He reached for his reading glasses with hands that shook just enough to betray him. "I thought it was a routine estate update," he murmured, eyes flicking between the pages, but never landing on mine. I leaned in. "You notarized it. You had to read it," he sighed, deeply. "Clarice brought it in, said you'd already reviewed everything. I trusted her, trusted that you—" His voice trailed off. My jaw clenched. "Did you benefit financially?" That finally got him to look at me. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. No answer. I didn't press further. The absence of denial was louder than any confession. Back at home, I went directly to the study. My old filing cabinet hadn't been touched in years, but the bank statements were all there. After an hour of combing through wire transfers, a single entry confirmed everything. $40,000 wired to Jackson's firm from one of Sterling's shell accounts, 3 days after the forged signature. I scanned, printed, and encrypted copies to an external drive. I'd learned to treat truth like insurance, always have backups. That afternoon, I called Clarice. "Let's meet," I said. "Downtown cafe, neutral ground." She showed up in stilettos and smugness, sunglasses perched high like a crown. The moment I sat down, she slid a check across the table. "20 grand, she said smoothly, stirring her cappuccino. A gesture to ease the tension. "To buy silence?" I asked. She smiled. "Call it what you want. At your age, peace is precious." I didn't respond. I simply picked up the check, tore it in half, then dropped the pieces directly into her cup. Cappuccino splashed onto the saucer, a few drops catching her white blouse. A collective gasp rose from the neighboring tables. Clarice's smile vanished. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "No," I said, standing, "but you might." I walked out without another word. That night, in the safety of my study, I plugged in the backup USB. The folder with the documents was intact, but one file was encrypted, labeled with Clarice's initials. I clicked it. A message appeared. "If you read this, it's war." My hand hovered on the mouse. My pulse ticked behind my ears. Another message flashed on screen. This time, from the same unknown number. "You'll want to see the hidden file labeled Chapel Hill." The words chilled me more than I expected. Chapel Hill wasn't just a location. It was where Ephra and I began everything, and where everything might have begun to unravel. The next morning, I found myself back in Chapel Hill, retracing steps of a life I thought had faded into memory. The duplex I once owned with my late wife now housed a rehab center run by her cousin, Meredith. The building stood longer than I had expected, not weathered, still facing the rising sun with quiet dignity. When Meredith stepped outside to greet me, her expression was strange, seasoned, reserved. She led me around the courtyard, where the old backyard swing had once hung. Now, it swayed gently in the breeze, empty. I pushed directly into the reason I'd come. "Meredith, I need to talk about something. Something of mine." She blinked, stiffened. After a tense moment, she walked me through the rehab center to the back office, unlocked a drawer, and withdrew a sealed envelope. It was my wife's handwriting. She looked away as I read the label. "To our son, only if he ever forgets." I explained where I'd found it. Meredith's eyes filled. "Sterling intercepted it years ago," she admitted. "He said it belonged to a future legacy project. Promised to preserve it." The weight hit like a door slamming shut. She pushed the envelope into my hand. Inside, a letter, on Heel Road stationery. Beneath the crease, a postscript I hadn't noticed earlier. "If anything happens to me, do not trust Sterling until he passes the test." As if trust were conditional, as if legacy needed to be earned. I called Jackson again. No answer, just voicemail. "This was the test," I whispered to her memory, and he failed. I followed Meredith to a locked cabinet and watched her retrieve another document, a deed to a property in Chapel Hill, purchased decades ago, in my name only. No joint ownership, no transfers, signed and witnessed by Bryce. That validated months of suspicion, but amid it, a spark of empowerment rose. I tracked down Bryce, who admitted he'd processed the paperwork, paid off under the table by Clarice's team to hide everything. Then he paused quietly. "I'm sorry. That anonymous message you've been getting." "It was me. I thought you needed to know." I nodded slowly, stunned by trust regained in small measure. He added, "There's more. They're meeting tonight at Jackson's office. Clarice and Sterling." Something inside me tightened. I needed proof. I drove back to town, parking across from Jackson's office. I set up a small recorder in the car and watched through the windshield. By dusk, Clarice emerged from a black SUV, sleek and confident. Sterling followed, smiling, casual. They passed each other a cup of coffee, leaning in close enough I thought I'd see the glint of conspiracy in Sterling's eyes. I turned the recorder on. I was not ready for what came next. The recorder didn't lie. Clarice's voice cut through the static like a scalpel. "He still thinks he owns the paperwork," she said, laughter bubbling behind every word. Sterling joined in, his tone sharp. "Let him? As long as he's wandering around feeling noble, he won't notice what's missing until it's all gone." Then came the real blow. "We'll push the diagnosis forward next week," Clarice continued. "Early cognitive decline, just a hint, enough to get guardianship if he resists." My grip tightened on the recorder. Anger rose in steady turns, from disbelief to whole-body resolve. I forwarded the file to Jackson with a single line, "Now or never." No answer yet, but I didn't need one. The plan was already in motion. I rented the old family cabin outside of Asheville, the one overlooking the quiet cove where Sterling first learned to skip stones. It felt fitting, isolated, peaceful, untouched by the spectacle they'd built. Invitations went out to Clarice, Sterling, Jackson, Bryce, and Meredith. Family dinner at the cabin. No cameras. We need to talk. Clarice answered swiftly. "We'll be there, trying to bridge things." Peace. A thin veneer. I prepared the place, set the long oak table with plates Sterling once painted as a child, hung a lantern above the fireplace. I even dug out the old family photo that Sterling had blurred, centered on my late wife's handwriting and proof that my face once had a place in this story. That evening arrived. Clarice and Sterling stepped out of their town car, dressed for reunion. Jackson followed, reserved. Bryce came next, hands trembling slightly. Meredith was last, quiet and watchful, the faithful keeper of truths. We sat. I began the evening with a simple statement. "You have all had the floor tonight. I'd like my turn." Jackson stood immediately, handing out printed bank statements and dated signatures. Bryce produced his own organized data pack, showing unauthorized withdrawals from trust accounts and emails confirming Clarice's motion to request guardianship under claims of main senility, all filed behind my back. Clarice's hand shook. Sterling blinked in shock. He looked at me, mouth opening and closing as though swallowing regret. Before anyone could react further, I pressed play on the Bluetooth speaker. Clarice's voice echoed in that room, not fabricated, not edited, but raw and unfiltered. "He still thinks he owns the paperwork." Every word landed like evidence. Meredith raised her phone. Her screen glowed as she live-streamed into a private family group. Sterling stood abruptly and slammed his napkin down. "You tricked us," he barked. Clarice went pale, lips trembling. Bryce then handed me a sealed folder. Inside, court motion estimating control over my affairs, filed to claim legal guardianship the week before. Clarice's signature was on it, dated 2 days after my surgery. I looked at them all, then nodded slowly. "I'm not your puppet, not anymore." Clarice stormed to the door. Sterling followed like a wounded heir. Jackson remained, glancing at me with a mix of guilt and relief. A sudden vibration pinged from my pocket. I pulled out the encrypted USB drive. A bank alert email had just arrived. A major withdrawal attempt was blocked at 8:13 p.m. The account in question belonged to one of the properties Clarice had tried to seize control of. Silence filled the cabin. Thick, full silence. I looked at Jackson. "Looks like someone forgot I control the signature authority." He nodded, eyes steady. Clarice and Sterling were gone. Their exit whispered through the dawning dusk. I stood alone with the things left. Memories, truths, validation. No apology, no redemption, just recognition, finally earned in the stillness of that room. The email sat unread in my inbox for nearly 20 minutes before I finally opened it. My hands hovered above the keyboard, the cursor blinking like a dare. When I finally clicked, the subject line hit me harder than I'd expected. Security alert, blocked transaction attempt. It detailed a $400,000 withdrawal from one of my private accounts, an attempt made just the night before. Clarice's name appeared under initiator. The transfer hadn't gone through. It was blocked, thanks to a freeze I'd placed months ago, back when I first sensed the tide turning against me. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the room wrap around me. Relief trickled in, slow and steady, but it carried with it a sorrow that sat heavy. They really thought I'd fall that easy, that after decades of giving and building, I'd crumble with the first push. I whispered aloud, "You never did know me, Clarice." The next morning, I walked into the bank with a file folder tucked under my arm. Mr. Aldridge, a man I dealt with for years, shook my hand with a tight nod. His eyes were lined with concern, but also something like respect. "Mr. Hannigan," he said, motioning toward his office. "I assume you're here about the attempted transfer." I nodded. "Let's talk." Behind the closed door, he laid out the report. Multiple attempts had been made in the last 2 weeks. The most recent was just the boldest. She also tried to add herself as a co-signer, he added, tapping a document. "About 3 weeks ago." I kept my jaw clenched. "That request went through?" He shook his head. "We flagged it. You've got alerts and freezes on every high-value account. You were prepared." Prepared. The word sounded odd coming from someone else's mouth, but I nodded anyway. "I need to take this to the next step," I said. "Legal protection, reallocation. I want this cleaned." Mr. Aldridge didn't hesitate. "I'll get the paperwork." By midday, I was standing in line at the Buncombe County Courthouse. A sealed folder in hand, I waited behind a young couple arguing over a parking ticket. When my turn came, I stepped forward and passed the file to the clerk. "Estate restructuring," I told her. She flipped it open briefly, glancing at the notarized forms, the trust reallocation, the witness statements. Her eyes paused at the new trust designation. "The grandchildren fund," she read aloud, then looked up at me with a small smile. "About time, sir." I left without responding, but her words stayed with me. That night, I sat by the fireplace in my den. The logs crackled low, filling the room with that particular kind of heat that makes your bones ache in the best way. I pulled out the old photo box again, same one I'd been cycling through all week. There she was, my wife, smiling at the lake house, her sun hat tilted just enough to hide the scar from surgery. Beside her, a much younger version of myself, holding a fishing rod and a laughing little Sterling. In another picture, Clarice handed me a steaming bowl of soup. I had the flu that winter. She'd brought it in with a slice of toast and a rare softness in her voice. I couldn't help but wonder, when did she change? Or had she always been this way, just waiting for the opportunity? A knock startled me. I opened the door, and there stood Meredith. No pretense, no makeup, just her, tired, damp from the drizzle outside, eyes red. "I left him," she said. I need to say some things. If you'll let me." I didn't step aside, I just said, "Tell me everything." She did. Over lukewarm tea and the quiet rhythm of the fire, she told me how Sterling had looped her into decisions, always with half-truths and softened edges. She admitted to knowing pieces, never the whole picture, but what she did know, she regretted. "I thought I was helping him," she said, voice cracking. "But I enabled him, and I didn't think about what that meant for you." I didn't offer forgiveness, but I didn't throw her out either. The house was still. No shouts, no accusations, just the long silence of two people standing in the wake of a broken family. Later that night, I logged into the trust portal. With a few clicks, I renamed the fund. A simple title. The Grandchildren Fund. Not for Sterling, not for Clarice, but for the ones still growing, still learning. I leaned back and whispered, "They took my name off the house, but they forgot. I still hold the land beneath it." The lawyer's office was the same as it had been for the last 25 years. Same creaky leather chairs, same wood-paneled walls, same smell of paper and coffee. Ms. Kearns hadn't aged a day, or perhaps I had just stopped noticing the passage of time in other people. She glanced up from the paperwork, her glasses slipping down her nose slightly. "You're sure about these changes?" she asked, her voice low, professional. I slid the manila folder across her desk, the one labeled Final Will, updated. Inside was everything we'd discussed, the trust redrawn, names removed, clauses fortified. Clarice and Sterling were out, completely, and a new clause added. Anyone who attempted to contest it would be immediately disqualified from receiving anything. "Yes," I said, "I'm protecting the people who never asked for anything." She studied me, eyes softening. "You're protecting your legacy." That word stuck with me. Legacy. I'd once thought it was built through inheritance and property. Now, I saw it differently. Quiet resilience passed down not in deeds or titles, but in character. Later that day, I met Jackson at the cafe on Haywood Street. It had started to drizzle, that soft Carolina rain that never quite soaked you, just clung to your skin and reminded you that the sky still cared. Jackson stirred his coffee slowly. "You've been awfully calm for a guy who's had half his life rewritten by liars." I watched the condensation run down my glass. "Because I finally stopped expecting them to change." He blinked, then leaned back in his chair. "That's something." I reached into my coat and handed him the old envelope he'd brought over the other day, marked Dad's last gift. He hadn't opened it, not yet, but I had. Inside had been a photo. The two of us, Sterling and me, standing in front of the original lake house, back when it was still ours. More importantly, a letter from my late wife. Written in her careful script, it said, "If they ever turn on you, remember this. People only steal what they fear they'll never earn." She'd also written something I hadn't expected. "Create backup protections. Trust your instincts, not your titles." She had seen it coming. All of it. Back home, I sat on the back porch as dusk settled in, notepad in hand. I was listing potential names for the new scholarship foundation. At first, I wrote down generic ones: Hannigan Future Fund, Legacy Pathways. But then the wind shifted, carrying the scent of magnolias and lake water. I scratched out the names and wrote a new one: the Ephra Hannigan Foundation, named after her, the woman who had shielded my heart even after her death. As I sat there, a car drove slowly past my house. Black, sleek, familiar. Clarice. She didn't stop, just glanced once at the porch and kept driving. I didn't wave. Later, I found my old cassette recorder. Yes, the same one we used to record bedtime stories for Sterling when he was little. I pressed record and cleared my throat. "Bryce," I said, "if you ever hear this, I want you to remember, don't let their mistakes shape you. You carry more of me than you know. And that's either a blessing or a burden depending on what you do with it." I paused, then added, "You were the first to speak up. That matters more than inheritance ever will." Click. I placed the recorder inside the old chest in my study, right next to the blueprint of the lake house. The real lake house, not the parody they tried to gift me. The fire in the hearth had died down by now. The room was dim, quiet. I stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the creaks of the house shifting on its bones, like it was nodding. I didn't rewrite the will to punish them. I rewrote it to remember myself. Just before bed, I stepped outside. The stars were clear tonight, cold and sharp, like a memory that refuses to fade. Tomorrow, I'd visit the lake, not theirs, mine. Tomorrow's visit may not be easy, I murmured, but I'd earned the right to stand on my own land. The front porch felt like a stage set for a performance that never came. I had laid out the coffee, brewed just the way Sterling liked it, black with a touch of cinnamon, and arranged a plate of oatmeal cookies beside it. The cushions were plumped, the breeze gentle, and the sun filtered softly through the old maple trees out front. Everything looked perfect for a reconciliation, or at least a conversation. A man prepares for a conversation the way he prepares for winter, knowing he may still be left in the cold. That was the phrase that circled in my mind as the clock crept past noon. I waited and waited. Then Joan appeared, clutching her phone and a worried expression. "I didn't want to get involved," she started, "but you should see this." She turned her screen to me, an image of Sterling stepping into the law office downtown, surrounded by two suited men. Below it was the caption from the local online newsletter. Sterling Hannigan pushes to secure father's assets amid reconciliation claims. My throat tightened. So, that was the visit he'd planned. Joan looked down. I thought you should know. He's not coming. I nodded once, no anger, just the kind of ache that feels more like fatigue than fury. Thanks, Joan. After she left, I put the coffee away, cleaned the untouched cups, and walked. At the diner, Jackson was already waiting. He didn't ask anything, just pushed a warm mug of decaf my way. We sat in silence for a while before he finally asked, "You all right?" I stirred the coffee slowly. "Let them dig," I said. "They'll find nothing I didn't bury myself." Jackson glanced at his phone and frowned. "It's the hospital." We didn't ask questions, just got up and left. Bryce was lying in a hospital bed, pale but stable. A nurse said it was stress and dehydration. Jackson muttered something about Bryce's mother pressuring him to stay away from me, threatening legal action if he continued interfering. The boy looked so young in that bed. I took a notepad from my coat and scribbled something down. I didn't read it aloud. Just folded the paper and left it on his bedside table. "Come home when you're ready," it said. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly. Autumn was pressing harder against the windows of Asheville. I took the long route home, through the part of town where I used to walk the boys after Sunday church. I passed by the lake, now almost drained for seasonal maintenance. There, I stood for a moment and saw myself, much younger, two small hands in mine, laughter bouncing off the water. Then, the vision slipped away, as it always did. Back on my porch, the untouched coffee had cooled completely. I didn't bother reheating it. Instead, I stared at the empty rocking chair opposite mine and whispered, "There's more to say, but maybe they're not ready to listen." I turned toward the mailbox. A single envelope peeked out, different from the usual bills and junk mail. The return address read, Thomas Lang, Estate Attorney. I tore it open right there, my fingers trembling not from fear, but anticipation. Inside, a photocopy of a handwritten will and a brief note. Mr. Hannigan, Paramus, Ephra Hannigan's instructions. This document was to be delivered upon confirmation of unauthorized transfer attempts. You'll find the original in Vault 3. My eyes darted to the signature at the bottom of the attached copy, Ephra Hannigan. Dated April 7, 2002. I stood there a long moment, wind rustling through the porch trees, the scent of old paper and cinnamon still lingering. The envelope felt heavier than I expected, the paper worn, but the ink still firm. The letter inside announced that an anonymous trust, set up years ago under strict confidentiality, had been activated. It transferred clear title of 10 lakefront properties, each purchased quietly over decades, back to my name. The handwriting wasn't mine, but the legacy was. My chest tightened with a quiet satisfaction. The house they offered me, only one lake view, was a mockery. These 10 homes were the real proof. I made a call to my estate attorney. Proceed immediately. Confirm filings. Lock it all down. In the small courthouse room the next morning, I watched from the wooden bench as the judge dismissed Sterling's petition to declare me mentally unfit. He had filled the court with claims, but the properties were already secured under a separate, irrevocable trust. The judge looked at me with respect, then said softly, "Thank you, Your Honor." The words tasted bittersweet. Sterling's team stumbled out behind him. The younger man looked pale and uncertain. The confident sheen of entitlement cracked. Later, I arrived at one of the lesser-known lake properties, humble, shaded by pines, hardly notable except it belonged to me. Bryce was waiting by the dock, hands tucked in his coat, face weathered but clear-eyed. We didn't speak at first. I stripped off my shoes and waded in. We spoke about fishing rods and water temperature, nothing heavy. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry for listening to the wrong voices." I nodded and he pulled out an old photo. It was of him as a boy, standing beside me and Sterling by this same lake, our hats oversized for our smiling faces. Back on the porch, a letter lay beside my notepad. I didn't mail it to anyone. I wrote it for myself. Wealth isn't about power nor ownership. Quiet dignity is taught, not taken. I listed names for a new scholarship: veterans, environmental restoration, scholarships in my wife's name. I folded it and placed it in a fireproof box labeled "For the Right Moment." Legacy measured not in titles, but in what I gave willingly, not forced. Evening came, and I walked along the quiet dock again. The air was cool, clear. I whispered, "Let them call me old, let them call me crazy, but no one can say I didn't love wisely." With practiced calm, I cast one last line into the glassy lake. The lake didn't ripple. Instead, it held stillness in its quiet mirror, reflecting the sky and trees, and me. I stood there a while, not lonely, accepting,